Hello everybody. Thank you very much to the organisers for the invitation to attend this event. As Raphael just said, I'll be here to present some preliminary findings from the EMN Children in Migration report for 2021 and 22 that will be out shortly. Just a little bit about the EMN. The EMN is an EU network of migration and asylum experts who work together to provide information for policy making in the EU and for the member states. We also do communications work, and there's an EU level as well as national contact points. We have national contact points in EMN member states, which is all of the EU apart from Denmark, as well as observer countries who are increasingly joining our work. Norway has been an observer country for the EMN for a long time, but also Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine, and more recently Montenegro, Armenia and Serbia have joined too. And it's coordinated at EU level by the European Commission, assisted by a service provider, ICF, and I work for ICF to coordinate a lot of the research. So what kind of work does it do? We primarily do research and publications, including ad hoc queries. These are like a list of questions that one member country might have for the other member countries to see how they respond to a particular situation. We do informs, which are shorter research pieces, and we've mentioned them already this morning a little bit. We've had recent informs on transition to adulthood, as well as accompanied children's rights to be heard in international protection procedures. Studies are a longer research. We also have an annual report on migration, which is a flagship report that comes out every year and covers the whole of migration. And that's where we collect information for the Children in Migration report that we do every year. There's a glossary of migration terms, and we also have conferences and roundtables. So, just to put the Children in Migration report in context, there have been increasing numbers of unaccompanied children seeking asylum in the EU and Norway over the last few years. Obviously, earlier, the number of people who were travelling in general and those who were able to seek protection or apply in different countries was affected by COVID. But since 2020, we've had high increases, almost double every year, of the number of unaccompanied minors who have been arriving. There's also quite a few children, this doesn't apply to Finland, I believe, who are registered in child protection systems, but not necessarily asylum systems, and all different countries at national level provide data in different ways. This is just two examples of two countries in Italy and Spain who provide information about the total numbers of unaccompanied minors, for example, within a child protection system, whether they've applied for asylum procedures or not. Of course, in 2022, unfortunately, we had the very difficult situation of children fleeing Russia's war against Ukraine, which led to an additional 1.5 million children who were beneficiaries of temporary protection, which included nearly 9,000 unaccompanied children. So the Children in Migration report, it maps the progress by EU member states, Norway, Georgia and Moldova, on the implementation of the recommended actions in the 2017 communication on the protection of children in migration. So obviously this is from the European Commission for EU member states, but several of our observer countries also have decided to report on how they also correspond to the recommendations in the communication. So it's primarily a report by member states, but we do also ask NGOs who work with children in migration particularly for examples of good practice. So just to say it's the third one in a row. So it covers different categories of migrant children: accompanied minors, families with children, separated children, unaccompanied minors, including those within the asylum system and those who don't apply, and where possible, where information is available. Also to say that it doesn't cover all of the actions in the 2017 Commission communications, but it focuses on priority areas each year. And for 2021 and 22, the scope of the document has looked at identification and registration, providing adequate reception facilities, alternative non-institutional care, guardianship, access to education, procedural safeguards including access to legal aid, detention for the purposes of return of both unaccompanied minors and families with children, transition to adulthood, and then in 2022 we also look at the implementation of the Temporary Protection Directive with regards to children. And its development in legislation and policies rather than some of the more practical measures that member states may take. So, because we're discussing the best interests of the child today, what I did was I looked at some of the information that was provided where member states themselves had highlighted that best interests of the child were a factor in why they had reported on particular policy changes. Now, the information for the Children Migration Report is taken from information provided for the annual report on migration. So it's not everything that happens in a year in every member state, but it includes those areas that certain member states have decided to highlight. So we can have a look at which of the areas member states have said that they had new developments or policies in 2022. So a few member states reported on developments on reception facilities. Bulgaria had, in several ways, a decision to work more closely with different departments and different governmental departments working together, and they've updated internal regulations to help apply an individual approach and take special care of unaccompanied minors to make sure that they're really showing the best interest of the child when they're looking at accommodation. In Spain, also they established new standing operating procedures for providing accommodation, and also a code of conduct for staff working at accommodation centres and a comprehensive child protection policy to be observed in accommodation centres for unaccompanied minors. Now, in terms of guardianship or representation, quite a few member states reported newer developments in 2022. Belgium had an e-learning tool for guardians, which included a section on best interests of the child. And in Greece in 2022, they reformed their national guardianship systems for unaccompanied minors to ensure the best interests of unaccompanied minors. So they, according to colleagues from Greece, the new guardianship system is more flexible. That while the state provides control and supervision, they're working closely with NGOs specialising in children protection to provide guardianship services after that's been designated by the prosecutor. Also on guardianship, in Lithuania there were new regulations to ensure appointing a guardian was done quicker because there had previously been delays. And in Luxembourg, there's actually an advisory commission for the assessment of the best interests of unaccompanied children. And there were small changes in 22, but nevertheless important. When a civil society representative was added to the commission, this was already foreseen in the regulation, but it was to ensure that not just that civil society was represented on the commission, but also to provide additional safeguards for the protection of children. So we've talked a bit about procedures today. This was another area where several member states reported new developments on procedural safeguards for children. In Austria, there was quite a few measures taken after a decision from 2021 to improve the protection and legal status of refugee children. So there was a new checklist developed to guarantee the best interest of child in procedures relating to asylum and the rights of foreign nationals, together with UNHCR. There was also training for caseworkers developed, focusing on the legal foundations of the best interest of the child and case law. as well as guidelines for the best interest of the child in asylum and aliens law, specifically for judges and including case law. Also, on procedural safeguards, colleagues in Finland reported changes. I'm sure we'll hear more about that later, to do with a more systematic hearing of accompanied children under the age of 12 in asylum procedures. And in Greece, colleagues worked with UNHCR and the EUAA to harmonise procedures for the best interest of accompanied minors to assure a best interest assessment in every step of an unaccompanied minor's case. In Slovakia, there was provisions to make sure that children received information in a manner which takes into account the age and level of maturity of the minor. And in Belgium, there was more of a reaction really to very difficult circumstances with reception, where generally there was a lack of reception facilities available, and there was a decision taken not to conduct age assessments for children as age tests being postponed because of some of the capacity issues. They didn't want that to affect the right of children to access reception facilities. There were also some developments reported from Belgium on detention for the purposes of the return of unaccompanied minors, as well as families with children. In 2022, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child had ruled that in 2019, Belgium hadn't sufficiently considered alternatives to detention because they hadn't given as a primary consideration their best interests, either at the time of detention or when the detention was extended. Belgium has since 2019 started a new department on alternatives to detention to promote voluntary return and individual case management and good practice. And NGOs have also highlighted the family-based case management system in Belgium as being quite good practice. And actually, EMN Belgium has a workshop in December on multi-stakeholder governance and holistic approaches to migration that's looking more about their case management work. Finally, with regards to the implementation of the Temporary Protection Directive with regards to children, Greece highlighted that their national emergency response mechanism had developed a best interest assessment teams for the number of Ukrainian children who were arriving, composed of social workers and interpreters, that was literally stationed at passport control points to assess the best interests of separated and unaccompanied children who were arriving, and to do a rapid assessment of how best to refer cases on. Separated minors were referred to social services to sort out emergency accommodation and see next steps. There are a couple, so I said that the Children in Migration report doesn't cover all of the areas from the recommendation, but there was some other best interest information highlighted by member states last year. Finland talked about a change of practice due to a decision of the Supreme Court in return cases, making sure that all members of the family receive a separate documentation with the decision information in it in case one member of the family receives a return decision. And in Spain, voluntary return guidelines were updated to reinforce the protection of minors. And finally, in Georgia, there was a new human rights strategy which included protection of children and a chapter on the rights of the child. So in conclusion, just to say that the information there is literally a snapshot of highlights provided by member states. It doesn't cover everything that happens, ongoing work for member states. It's just those areas that certain member states have chosen to highlight on best interests of the child that year. Also, that because this information is collected through the annual report on migration, member states report on the drivers, why they've made particular policy change, and it covers the whole of migration. So it's not always in so much detail, but accompanying the annual report on migration, there are country fact sheets for each country, which gives a short summary of developments, including for minors and other vulnerable groups. And all of these country fact sheets, including for Finland, are available on the EMN website.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Thank you for the presentation of the preliminary findings, and we will, of course, communicate when the report will be published later, I hope before the end of the year, so that you all can have a look at it yourselves if you want to. And now, of course, there is the huge moment of suspense if our speaker from Brussels and the European Commission who is going to be joining us online. I hope Anna Schmidt, Dr. Anna Schmidt is there. We hope that she will be
here.
You are there. Perfect. Thank you.
I am here, and I'm also on camera, but I don't know whether you can see me.
Well, not now. We can see you. Excellent.
I'm huge. I can see.
Excellent. Oh, yes. We are very, very glad to be able to welcome you to provide some views from the European Commission on the report and on the topic of today. And Ms. Anna Schmidt, she works for the Directorate General for Migration and Home Affairs. So please, Anna.
Thank you very much for having me. And I am so sorry. I've been listening since the beginning, and I am really very sorry I can't be with you in person. It's busy times here, and at the end of the year, the mission budgets are also tight. But no, that was really interesting, and I'm really glad I got to listen in. We are very closely involved also in the work of the EMN, of course, as you've heard. So in terms of comments, there's maybe very little for me to say. I want to frame this a little bit, and maybe the order, the sequence in which we're doing this is a bit odd, but I'm going to go back to a little bit to the more general points. And it's been said before how central or comparatively central the best interest of the child consideration is in EU law generally, but also in everything that belongs to the common European asylum system. And it's reiterated at multiple points. It's obviously part of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, where it takes a prominent place. But as many have also said, and we see that very much in the asylum acquis, it's both a principle and a rule of procedure, and we're going back and forth on presumptions about what kind of measures are necessary to ensure the best interest of the child, and issues about how to ensure an assessment of the best interest of the child is made at different times in the procedure. And I think some of that you have obviously heard in the reporting also that member states do on this. So I just wanted to say, and we still have this situation, that in terms of the procedural guarantees, not all member states have formal processes in place, despite the fact that this is overall a fundamental principles of EU law. And that's simply a way of approaching this, and we are working, including through the EFM, on harmonizing member states' practices across the board on the understandings, obviously also through case law. It was briefly mentioned how important the issue has been, that the numbers were presented. We are really looking at a situation where not just in our policy discussions due to the pact, and I'll come to that in a second, the legislative proposals that are on the table and that are currently debated, the issue of guarantees and safeguards and attention to children is back on the table, but also just through the facts on the ground and the issue that we have such an increase on arrivals, specifically of unaccompanied minors, and through the issue of the large amount of children and women and children, separated children in this case, very much coming from Ukraine and hosted in the EU. And the fact that because the children arriving from Ukraine are under a different legal regime and the temporary protection directive, we also have a bit of a wanted, unwanted experiment on sort of how other ways of approaching this are impacting on the well-being of children. And maybe just to say that the connections between the asylum system and national child protection services that are applicable to all children, and the different connections between the sort of different regimes member states have put in place to guarantee the rights under temporary protection and the national child protection system is something that we have been very interested in recent times to understand and also to support member states and their obligations and how to do this. Reference was made to what still is the standard, and when we look at children in migration, it's the 2017 communications and the recommendation made there, and the EMN report really is at the moment the principal way in which we are tracking what is being done on this. That remains, and that is maybe sort of both a testimony to the quality of the communication, I would say that obviously, but also to the sort of many challenges still involved in putting principles and ambitions into practice. There's been some good progress, and I think a lot of it has been around guardianship systems. Member states in different ways have worked on this very much so. We have established the European Guardianship Network that facilitates the exchange on this and helps address some common challenges. We've had different policy developments. The action plan on integration and inclusion is specifically about also measures benefiting migrant children in the areas of education and also transition into adulthood, because that was an issue that was mentioned here. We have the 2021 EU strategy on the rights of the child that also explicitly includes all migrant children on a non-discriminatory basis should benefit of the same level of protection as EU children, so irrespective of migration status. We have the adoption of the EU Child Guarantee recommendations by the Council and the associated action plans, again, specifically looking at issues of exclusion, children with a poverty background, including migrant children. We have established the EU network of child rights experts, linking child protection authorities of the member states in an exchange. And then again, also, and I just wanted to mention this, the amount of work that is done in the EMN network, but also through the agencies, the EUAA, the Fundamental Rights Agency, and Frontex, who have developed all sorts of practical guidance tools, interpretative tools to help member states to strengthen their capacity in this field. Funding, I just wanted to also flag that under the home funds, they've been most recently, including in reaction to what we see in the sort of changing numbers and the trends. We have just finalized 2 calls to support reception systems and personnel working specifically with unaccompanied minors. One has been on a union program, so this goes to civil society organizations to strengthen guardianship networks, to support guardians in the member states and to help them exchange with each other in their work. And the other one has been for member states under pressure, so particularly on unaccompanied minors, focusing on alternative care arrangements in reception, so deinstitutionalized care, and how to work on that. And there was also a focus there in some of the programs that member states submitted on support to children in transition to adulthood specifically. And then lastly, I wanted to briefly talk about the pact, which is obviously very much in the news now, and we are in the final stages, still very difficult stages of the negotiations between the co-legislative, the Parliament and the Council on this. In the pact, we proposed across the different legislative instruments some important new safeguards for children and especially unaccompanied minors. And again, it was said earlier, I think there's been a lot of discussions around the pact, and there are very different interests that are bundled up on this, but on the issue of children and unaccompanied minors, I think there's a general consensus that these are progressive steps that were in the pact proposals. And that maybe it's also important that one of the issues there was about making the best interest assessment more operational, to sort of specifically when it comes to the reform of the Dublin procedures on how to take into account an assessment of the best interest of the child in any relocation decisions and responsibility decisions, and also a form to be developed on the exchange of relevant information across member states. Very much trying to facilitate family tracing and family reunification, and shortening the time limits to deal with children, unaccompanied minors, but also children in general, in order to sort of reduce these times of limbo. In the trilogues now, we have the European Parliament specifically that has introduced several additions and proposals to further strengthen the rights and safeguards for children. And I can basically group them, and I just wanted to briefly talk about it. Maybe it's interesting. I don't know how much people follow this, but there's a whole section on safeguarding the rights of minors. So this is about representation by guardians and or a legal representative. This applies both to the reform of the Dublin process, but also to the asylum procedures regulation that is being discussed, timelines, how quickly that can be done and has to be done. And I think there we see an issue between making these timelines very short and what is feasible in reception conditions, and especially in the context of member states under pressure. That is a discussion that is currently going on between the co-legislative. There's general obligations that the Parliament has proposed, very much in line, also reinforcing a bit what the Commission has already proposed to prioritize procedures involving children, and an obligation for immediate action by authorities with regards to applications specifically in unaccompanied children. There's a reinforcement also that the Parliament has proposed on confidentiality rules in cases involving minors. And this is something that is very much under discussion because it sort of conflicts with some other sort of broader principles of mutual trust between member states, but the Parliament is also asking for an obligation for the transferring member states to attain very much individual guarantees from a receiving member states on the special guarantees that can be provided for a given child. So this is something, I'm just raising this is something that is under discussion and a bit difficult for the Council and also for the Commission. And there are issues on emphasizing the need for appropriate training for staff working with children and unaccompanied minors in particular. Issues on representation I talked about. I also, again, on the best interest of the child assessment, there's a sort of way to further emphasize the different factors that have to be taken into account when assessing the best interests of the child. So the different rights in question, the time period in question, so considerations of short, medium, and long term. So just framing the best interest assessment, broader or more tightly, depending on how you interpret that. That has been a proposal of the Parliament. Information exchange I talked about. Yes, and then maybe we also see it very much on reception conditions, where we already have a consensus, sharpening the guarantees and the safeguards for children in reception. I just wanted to highlight these issues. This has been a core issue in the negotiation at the moment. I'll come to a close. Maybe I realize I'm a bit long. But we are expecting that the text will change. Some issues are under discussion. What this will not solve, and I think this is some of the issues that we have discussed, is really the implementation question. The pact as a whole puts a lot of emphasis on ensuring a strategic and a joint approach to how to actually implement decided provisions. So there's a long transition phase that involves, currently based on the Council proposal, these national implementation plans, the support of the agencies in doing that and working that out. And again, I think doing this implementation and transition phase there will be time to really make sure that we work jointly on translating this into practice. Transition of children into adulthood, there is nothing there, but again, this is very much something that we also take up in the networks. And I think I will come to a close. This is a little bit what I wanted to say and just put on the table, and happy to answer any questions you may have.